A Rustlers microwave burger contains close to 3 grams of salt in one pack. That is almost half your recommended daily limit in a single meal. The patty itself is not just pure beef. It's made from roughly 40% beef blended with beef fat, soya protein, flavourings, and stabilisers to bulk it out and hold it together. And Rustlers is not the only one doing all these. Across UK supermarkets, ready meal brands have been quietly reformulating recipes and increasing prices. Today we are calling out 8 of the worst UK ready meal brands currently on shelves. Brands shoppers have repeatedly complained about for shrinking portions, declining quality, and disappointing standards. And Rustlers is only the beginning. By the end of this, you may start reading the back of the tray very differently. 8. Sainsbury's ready meals. When you see the words "taste the difference," you expect something noticeably better. The packaging looks refined. The photography shows rich sauces, generous meat portions, and restaurant-style presentation. The price is higher than the standard range, which reinforces the idea that you are paying for quality. For many UK shoppers, especially those who do not want to compromise but also do not want takeaway prices, this range feels like a safe middle ground. But once you start looking closely, the picture becomes less reassuring. In many of these meals, meat content still sits around the mid-teens to low 20s% range. That means the majority of what fills the tray is rice, pasta, mash, or sauce. On the front of the pack, the meat is the star. On the back of the pack, it is often just one component among many bulking ingredients. Shoppers have increasingly pointed out that what used to feel generous now feels stretched. Then there is the issue of salt. Several dishes sit close to 3 grams per portion. For older viewers watching their blood pressure, that is not a small number. It is a significant part of your daily intake in one sitting. When convenience becomes this heavily seasoned, you have to ask whether flavour is being boosted to compensate for something else. Consistency is another recurring complaint. One batch tastes balanced, the next feels thinner, saltier, or less satisfying. Long-time customers say recipes no longer taste the way they remember. Portions appear slightly smaller. The sauce sometimes dominates the tray more than the protein itself. This is where frustration turns into disappointment. No one expects a ready meal to be homemade, but when you are paying a premium supermarket price, you expect a clear step up. More substance, better texture, a genuine difference. Instead, many shoppers feel they are paying extra for upgraded branding rather than upgraded ingredients. And that is the deeper issue. When premium ranges begin to blur into standard quality, trust erodes. You stop feeling confident that paying more actually gives you more. If a premium supermarket line struggles to justify its name, what happens when we move further down the pricing ladder? Good. That's the right instinct. When we're calling something a disgrace, we don't warm up slowly, we go straight to the issue. 7. Asda Extra Special Ready Meals. Asda's Extra Special Ready Meals are priced and presented as an upgrade, but in many cases, the numbers tell a different story. In several popular dishes, meat content still sits around the mid-teens% range. That means most of the tray is rice, pasta, mash, pastry, or sauce. The protein featured boldly on the front of the box often becomes secondary once the meal is heated. Shoppers have repeatedly pointed this out. Complaints mention smaller meat pieces, trays that feel lighter than before, and sauces that seem to dominate the dish. Some customers say meals that once felt hearty now feel stretched. You open the tray expecting substance, but what you often see is more filler than centerpiece. Salt levels are another recurring concern. Many extra special meals fall between roughly 2.5 to over 3 grams of salt per portion. For older viewers managing blood pressure, that is a serious amount in one sitting. When a convenience meal delivers that level of salt, it raises the question of whether flavour is being enhanced naturally or engineered to compensate for reduced quality. Then there is value. These meals cost noticeably more than Asda's standard range, but numerous shoppers say the difference in taste and texture does not match the difference in price. The step up feels smaller than the label suggests. If you're paying extra, you expect more meat, richer flavour, better balance, not just upgraded packaging. This is where frustration turns into distrust. Because when a premium supermarket range begins to resemble the standard line in everything except price, the word extra starts to lose meaning. You are no longer paying for clearly better ingredients. You may simply be paying for the perception of improvement. And if this is what a supermarket calls extra special, wait until we examine one of the most recognizable premium ranges in the UK. 6. Tesco Finest Ready Meals. In a number of Tesco Finest Ready Meals, the meat content can sit between roughly 15 and 20% of the total tray. That means up to 80% of what you are eating is rice, pasta, mash, pastry, or sauce. For meals marketed around chicken, beef, or lamb, most shoppers expect the protein to dominate the dish. But once heated, the tray often tells a different story. The sauce can outweigh the meat visually, and the portion of protein can feel smaller than the name on the front suggests. Shoppers have noticed. Reviews frequently mention fewer visible chunks of meat, thinner slices, and portions that feel lighter than they remember. Some long-time customers say recipes taste different than they did a few years ago. Others describe sauces that feel more prominent and less balanced. Salt levels are another concern. Several Tesco Finest meals contain close to 3 grams of salt per portion. For anyone over 55 monitoring blood pressure, that is a substantial amount in a single sitting. Strong seasoning can create instant flavour impact, but it can also overpower subtler ingredients. Then comes the price. At around £4 to £5 per tray, expectations are high. Shoppers assume they are paying for noticeably better quality than the standard range. But when the meat content remains modest and the experience feels only slightly upgraded, the premium becomes harder to justify. This is where disappointment sets in, because people do not object to convenience. They object to paying more while receiving less substance. When a product labelled finest delivers a tray that is still majority starch and sauce, trust begins to weaken. And if this is what one of the UK's largest supermarkets calls its top tier, what does that say about the brands charging even more? 5. Morrison's, the best ready meals. Heat one of Morrison's, the best steak pies, and look at what actually fills the tray. The gravy often dominates, the pastry takes up most of the weight. And the steak, the part you are supposedly paying for, can feel secondary. Shoppers have repeatedly commented that the meat pieces seem smaller than they expected and sometimes fewer than they remember. In casseroles and pies, the sauce often becomes the most visible component once heated. The protein, which headlines the meal, becomes a supporting character. Only when you check the back of the pack do the proportions start to make sense. In many dishes across this range, meat content sits around the 15 to 20% mark. That means the majority of what you are buying is not steak or chicken. It is pastry, mash, rice, vegetables, and sauce. That alone would not be alarming if the price reflected it. But the best range is positioned and priced as a premium offering. At roughly £4 or more per tray, shoppers expect something substantial. They expect visible value. Instead, many reviews describe meals that feel lighter, less filling, and more sauce-heavy than they once were. Then there is the salt. Several meals in this line approach 3 grams per portion. For viewers over 55, especially those monitoring blood pressure, that is a serious figure in one sitting. High salt can make a dish taste richer than it truly is. It creates intensity, but intensity is not the same as depth. And that is the tension here, because the best is not a neutral label, it is a bold claim. When the numbers on the back reveal modest protein content and elevated salt levels, the gap between branding and reality becomes harder to ignore. If this breakdown is helping you see these trays differently, take a moment to like and subscribe. The worst brands are still ahead, and what comes next is even more revealing. If a supermarket's own premium range struggles to clearly justify its name, wait until we examine a brand that charges even more, while promising restaurant-quality cooking at home. 4. Aldi Specially Selected Ready Meals. Aldi's specially selected range is positioned as a premium step above its everyday ready meals. The packaging is darker, more refined. The dish names sound restaurant-inspired: slow-cooked beef, creamy chicken bakes, indulgent curries. The price is higher than Aldi's basic trays, signalling that you are paying for improved quality. But when you heat the meal and actually examine what is inside, the experience does not always match the promise. One recurring complaint from shoppers is inconsistency. Some purchases feel satisfying, others feel noticeably lighter or less balanced. Customers have described opening one tray with visible chunks of meat, then buying the same dish weeks later and finding fewer pieces, thinner cuts, or more sauce dominating the tray. That unpredictability weakens trust, especially in a range marketed as carefully selected. Then there is the matter of proportion. In several dishes across the range, the meat content often falls around the mid-teens % of the total weight. That means most of what fills the tray is rice, pasta, mash, pastry, or sauce. When a meal is labelled as beef, chicken, or lamb, shoppers expect the protein to be the centre of the experience. Instead, once heated, it can feel like the sauce or starch takes over visually. Salt levels are another important factor. Many specially selected ready meals contain roughly 2.5 grams or more of salt per portion. For viewers over 55, particularly those conscious of heart health and blood pressure, that is a significant amount in a single meal. Heavy seasoning can create bold flavour quickly, but it can also blur the line between depth and intensity. A meal can taste strong without necessarily being rich in quality ingredients. Value is where tension builds further. Aldi built its reputation on affordability. When customers move up to the premium line, they expect a noticeable jump in substance, more generous meat portions, better texture, clearer flavour separation. When the improvement feels modest or inconsistent, the higher price becomes harder to justify. And this is the deeper issue. Premium branding creates a promise. It tells shoppers that they are buying something special. When the ingredient proportions remain similar to standard ready meals and salt levels remain high, that promise begins to feel stretched. If this is happening in a supermarket known for value-driven pricing, what happens when we examine brands that charge even more while marketing themselves as restaurant-quality dining at home? 3. Lidl Deluxe Ready Meals. Lidl's Deluxe Ready Meals are positioned as a step up: richer recipes, premium presentation, indulgent flavours. But when you heat the tray and look at what actually fills it, the experience can feel heavier than it should, and not in a good way. One of the most common complaints is imbalance. In several dishes, the sauce becomes the dominant element. It coats everything, pools at the edges, and visually outweighs the meat. In beef casseroles and pasta bakes, shoppers frequently report that the protein feels limited once stirred through. The dish may look full at first glance, but much of that volume comes from sauce and starch. When you examine the ingredient proportions, the picture becomes clearer. Across a number of deluxe meals, meat content typically falls around the mid-teens % of total weight. That means the majority of the tray is rice, pasta, vegetables, pastry, or sauce. For a range marketed as indulgent and premium, that ratio can feel underwhelming once you realize how much of the meal is filler rather than centerpiece. Then there is the richness factor. Many deluxe dishes carry between roughly 2.5 to 3 grams of salt per portion. Cream-based meals can also contain high levels of fat. On paper, that creates bold flavor and a satisfying first bite. But repeated customer feedback suggests that some meals feel overly seasoned and heavy rather than balanced. Several shoppers mention oil separating and pooling on the surface after heating, particularly in curries and creamy dishes. That visual alone can change how a meal feels. Instead of appearing freshly cooked, it can look processed and overly engineered, and this is where the downside becomes more serious. High salt and fat levels may enhance flavour quickly, but they also increase the nutritional burden of what is supposed to be a convenient dinner. For older viewers monitoring heart health or blood pressure, these numbers are not trivial. When a single tray accounts for a large portion of daily salt intake, it stops being just a quick meal. The deeper issue, though, is expectation. Deluxe implies something noticeably superior. It suggests a clear step above the everyday ready meal. When the protein remains modest and the seasoning does most of the heavy lifting, the premium positioning begins to feel cosmetic. Customers are not complaining because it is convenient food. They are complaining because the experience does not match the promise. And if a supermarket's indulgent range struggles to justify its label, wait until we examine a brand that charges significantly more, while marketing itself as close to restaurant quality dining at home. 2. Charlie Bigham's Ready Meals. Charlie Bigham's ready meals sit at the premium end of the supermarket shelf. At that level, shoppers are not simply paying for convenience, they are paying for what is marketed as restaurant-quality food prepared with care. That positioning creates high expectations. People assume they are buying something significantly closer to freshly cooked food than standard supermarket ready meals. But once you examine the composition of many of these trays, the value becomes harder to justify. Across several dishes in the range, meat content typically sits in the high teens to low 20s% of total weight. That means the majority of the tray is still pasta, rice, sauce, or vegetables. For a product that carries a premium price and highlights ingredients like beef, chicken, or lamb on the front, shoppers often expect a more substantial proportion of protein. Instead, once heated and served, the visual balance can feel similar to mid-tier supermarket meals, with starch and sauce dominating the tray. Portion size is another recurring concern. Many Charlie Bigham's meals weigh around 300 to 400 grams. For some adults, that is not a particularly filling dinner. Customers have commented that the portion feels modest relative to the price. When you consider that a single tray can cost close to what a freshly prepared takeaway meal might cost, expectations increase sharply. If the portion does not feel generous, the premium becomes difficult to rationalize. The texture of the dishes has also been criticized. Pasta in baked meals can feel soft rather than structured. Cream-based sauces can feel dense and heavy instead of layered and balanced. While the ingredients may appear more refined than budget brands, the overall experience is still that of a mass-produced product reheated at home. The difference between this and genuinely fresh restaurant food becomes apparent when you compare texture and depth of flavor. Salt levels vary depending on the dish, but several meals still approach 2 to 3 grams per portion. At a premium price point, shoppers often expect a more balanced nutritional profile rather than flavor-driven primarily by seasoning. For older viewers especially, that salt level remains significant in a single sitting. The deeper issue, however, is perception versus proportion. When a ready meal is positioned as close to restaurant dining, customers expect a clear and measurable step up in substance. If the protein content remains modest, the portion feels restrained, and the nutritional profile still leans heavily on salt and fat for impact, the premium image begins to weaken. People are not objecting to convenience itself. They are questioning whether the premium label truly reflects what is inside the tray. And when the cost approaches restaurant pricing, but the composition remains typical of supermarket ready meals, the gap between expectation and reality becomes harder to ignore. If this is what the high end of the ready meal market looks like, what happens when we move to the brand most associated with ultra convenience and aggressive processing? 1. Rustlers microwave meals. Rustlers represents the extreme end of convenience. These are meals designed to be heated in minutes, eaten quickly and forgotten just as fast. Burgers, hot sandwiches, microwavable wraps, all positioned as simple solutions for hunger when time is short. They are widely available, heavily promoted, and often priced to feel affordable. But when you look closely at what makes up a Rustler's meal, the downsides become much harder to ignore. Take the classic microwave burger. The patty itself is not simply minced beef. In many versions, the burger is made from roughly 40% beef combined with beef fat, soya protein, flavourings, and stabilisers to hold the mixture together. That means more than half of what you are eating is not straight beef. It is a constructed blend designed to extend the meat and maintain texture after microwaving. The bun is another component built for shelf life rather than freshness. It is soft, uniform, and designed to survive extended storage. The cheese is processed, formulated to melt evenly under microwave heat. The sauces are engineered for consistency and sweetness. Then there is the salt content. Many Rustlers burgers contain close to 3 grams of salt in a single pack. That is nearly half of the recommended daily limit for an adult in one small meal. For older viewers monitoring blood pressure or heart health, that figure alone is concerning. Add in the fat content and the low fiber profile, and the nutritional balance becomes heavily skewed. Texture is another recurring complaint. The meat can feel uniform and soft rather than fibrous and structured. The bun often becomes steamy and dense after heating. The overall experience is designed for speed, not for depth or freshness. And this is the core issue. Rustlers is not pretending to be a home-cooked meal, but it is marketed as a normal dinner option. When the protein is diluted with fillers, salt levels are high, and the entire product is built around maximum shelf stability. It raises questions about long-term dietary impact if eaten regularly. For families relying on quick options during busy weeks, this is where awareness matters. Convenience is not the problem. The composition is. Rustlers sits at the top of this list because it embodies the most aggressive form of processing within the ready meal category. High salt, modified protein blends, engineered bread and extended shelf life all combine into a product that prioritizes stability and cost efficiency over nutritional balance. And when this becomes a regular substitute for freshly prepared meals, the consequences accumulate quietly over time. What this really means for you. We have just broken down 8 of the worst UK ready meal brands currently sitting on supermarket shelves. Not because convenience is evil, not because every tray is dangerous, but because the gap between branding and reality keeps widening. Across premium and budget ranges alike, the same patterns appear. Modest meat content, high salt levels, heavy reliance on sauce, starch and seasoning. Prices rising while portions feel lighter. For older shoppers especially, this matters. Blood pressure doesn't respond well to repeated high-salt meals. Diets built around low fiber, heavily processed food, quietly shift health over time. And when these trays become weekly habits rather than occasional conveniences, the long-term impact is not small. So what should you actually do? Start simple. Turn the pack over. Check the meat percentage. Look at the salt per portion. Compare portion weight to price. If the protein is under 20% and the salt sits near 3 grams, pause. Ask whether that tray is worth it. You do not need complicated diets or expensive health trends. Basic rules protect you. Choose meals with higher visible protein. Avoid anything pushing half your daily salt limit in one sitting. Do not assume premium means proportionally better. If this breakdown helped you see these ready meals differently, share it with someone and subscribe. This channel exists to give control back to shoppers, especially those who just want honest food and straightforward answers.